Hey, good morning guys. Welcome to another day. I've got a lot to talk about to you today, so I'm going to try and get through this as quickly as I can so you guys don't have a half-hour long video to watch. So, this is what we're talking about. Things I did this weekend, actually. It's called camera obscura. If you haven't heard of it, this is a way that for hundreds of years people have used, before we had photography and film and things like that, projecting an image from outside your room, inside your room. It's really pretty simple, just a hole in the wall or hole in the window. I'm going to put a link in the comments, but we did it this weekend, covering up the windows and opening up just a tiny little crack in the cardboard that we covered them up with, and we had a street scene from outside projected on the wall of the bedroom. We could see cars passing, people walking by. It was all upside down. It was really cool. So my thumbnail for this actually has a picture of the roses from outside of the window that were projected onto the ceiling, which just blew my mind. Try it out. You can even do it like in a cardboard box. It's amazing. Okay, things to talk about for this week. The first, number one I want to talk about is MLA format. Some of you guys are losing points on this, and this is something I really want you to get as a skill moving into high school. MLA format, that means Modern Language Association. And this is a standard. You're going to see this in high school, you're going to see this in college, and you really need to get in the practice of this. It helps the teachers and it helps you. Okay, so what this is, your first assignment is practicing MLA heading. Some of you guys have this, and you got an easy assignment here, but you're losing points. Like if I give a 70-point assignment, I'm taking off 1 point for the heading. If I give a 10-point assignment, I'm taking off 1 point for the heading. So just be aware, if you do not put a proper heading, a complete MLA style heading, then you're losing a point for that. This is why you want to use an MLA style heading. It's professional. So teachers are using it, professors are going to use it. It's going to be something that you want to use, and it shows that you are not a little kid anymore. You know how to write your first name and your last name, and you know how to professionally present something that you've worked on. Second, it's practical. MLA helps sort all of the details. So if you're going through your Google Drive and you open up a document and you're like, what is this document? Was this for English or history or science? Up at the top of the page, it's going to tell you exactly what it is. When a teacher is opening up a document and is looking at it, and they're in the middle of that document, then they're wondering, well, what class was this for? Was this for U.S. history or world history? Was this for second period or fourth period? Your MLA heading is going to help them narrow that down. And I know some people will say, well, can't you just tell who turned it in based on what it says at the top for the, because it was turned into Google Classroom or to Schoology and it's already marked with your name? Sometimes, yes. Not all the time, and either way it is a tool that you can use. If you share this to somebody else and it is something that they can read, it's also going to show them what it was for. When you go back to look at it and you wonder, what assignment was this for? If you don't have the name of the assignment, that's going to be really tough to know what assignment to turn it into when you go to your digital classroom somewhere. So it's going to tell, is this the document for the correct assignment or the class? And then what's the document about? Is this something about Reconstruction? Is it something about the Civil War? Is it something about mitosis in biology? Right? One exception that I have, MLA format usually says to double space everything. As far as I'm concerned, in a digital medium, you don't need to double space because I can zoom in, I can zoom out, I can double space it if I want to do it. Usually they do that so that it's easier to read and scan through, but if I can modify your text, it doesn't matter. Also, if it is something that I want to leave notes on, double spacing helps the instructor to write notes in between your lines, but I add comments in a digital format along the sides of the document, so you don't need to double space for me. Okay, let's review Reconstruction. Some people still at the end of last week are still kind of fuzzy on what was Reconstruction. The name of it isn't really clear. Construction is putting things together. So like we've got our blocks here today, and if I build something, that's construction. If I destroy something, that's deconstruction. The Civil War was a lot about deconstruction. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of things were broken up. Also, social structure, economic structure was broken up in the South. So remember, they had their agricultural society built on slavery. Well, in this case, we were breaking down that economic structure for slavery. We were breaking down the social structure of slavery. And in a lot of cases also, as the Union troops moved through the South, they were breaking up the railroad tracks, literally taking the irons from the rails and wrapping them around trees if they could, bending them so that the Confederate troops couldn't just come around behind them and put the railroad tracks back together. There was a lot of destruction. So at the end of the Civil War, we needed to bring the South back into the Union, and we call that Reconstruction, because not only were we rebuilding the railroad tracks in the South, which is a minor point of Reconstruction, but more importantly, we're rebuilding the social and cultural and economic structure of the South so that it can be part of the United States again. Alright, so let's take a look at today's lesson. Today's lesson, we're going to talk about the Compromise of 1877. This hinges on the election of 1876. Remember, we talked about the election of 1860, which brought in Abraham Lincoln. That was an important election. But now we're going to talk about voting and elections in 1876. Alright, so 1876, the Republican Party had been in the White House since 1861. So from 1861 to 1876, that's a long time for the Republicans to be in power. And while they were in the power, they were passing all kinds of laws that were favorable to the North and favorable to Republicans, and the Democrats were not having a say in it, right? But unfortunately, for all of the moral causes that they were going into it for, all of the moral causes that the Civil War was founded on, of civil rights, abolition of slavery, well, we kind of fixed all that, didn't we? Well, not really, but we had already addressed it. We had done a lot of efforts to do that, and the Republicans had been in power so long that you're starting to see a lot of corruption. You're starting to see the Republicans that had suddenly taken over power in the South that were abusing that power. You had there was one legislator that was in power that he had an annual salary of $8,000, and he somehow accumulated expenses of $100,000. He was able to have so much money because of the corruption that was in there. Ulysses S. Grant, the president, he was known for corruption in his administration, bribery and scandal and just abuse of money. And so people that had originally been in favor of the Republicans were starting to think the Democrats are not so bad. Democrats, maybe we'll give them a chance. You know, we've got other issues. That's another thing, other issues. We've moved away from the moral causes of abolition of slavery, and now you have financial concerns. So, after the Civil War, 1873, there had been so much investment in railroads. So here we got our little choo-choo train, right? So much investment in railroads. A lot of banks putting money into railroads, and they overextended themselves. They put so much money out there that they didn't have enough money to pay off their debts. So you have one major bank that was financing the railroad, and it collapsed. That set off the Panic of 1873. 1873 was a panic where one bank collapses and everybody's trying to get their money out of this and that, and then another bank collapses, and then there's no more money in your bank, and you were trying to get the money out before it affected you. And this set off a ripple effect that not only affected North America but also Europe. This was a financial collapse that led to a depression that lasted for 4 years. In this depression, you had companies going bankrupt. You had companies trying to avoid going bankrupt by lowering wages. You had workers striking because they were unhappy with the low wages they were getting. You had all of these ripple effects that people aren't worried about civil rights anymore. People are worried about, how do I pay my bills? How do I feed my family? So the 1873 panic really has a hinge impact on how people approach the election of 1876. All right, now let's get into the election of 1876. Election was one where the results ended up being very close. When that happens, there's always a dispute over the ballots and the arguments over what is a fair election. Who was going to be the next president? We had two candidates. We had Rutherford B. Hayes, he was a Republican, and Samuel J. Tilden, he was a Democrat. He was a Democrat. He was from the North, but he was a Democrat. He was moderate. Hayes was actually moderate too. They were both not extreme in their views, which people thought, well, that would make them more electable, and sure, that's good. But as we went into this election, Tilden won the popular vote. That means more people voted for him, and Hayes won the Electoral College. Now, the Electoral College is the one that actually decides the presidency, but the popular vote kind of gets us there. Frequently, they line up about the same. You have the popular vote and the Electoral College both favoring the same person. But sometimes, and this is one of the problems with our system that we haven't quite worked out, because we run into this a few times in our history, that we have a popular vote winner and an Electoral College winner, and they're not the same person, and then all the popular people that voted for the popular vote, that voted the populist people, the Pope, everybody's popular, right? Everybody who voted for the person who won the popular vote says, well, why doesn't everybody win? The reason is we're not a direct democracy. A direct democracy is where you just take whoever got the most votes and they go in. No, we have a version of that, a modified version where we have representatives and we have a Republican situation. So, the parties started arguing over counting the ballots. Which votes didn't get counted? There were actually 3 or 4 states that were turning in ballots that were questionable. In fact, there were 3 states, Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, that were turning in 2 sets of ballots returns, and they had differing results, saying, okay, well, here's the report on these ballots, and Tilden won. But we also have this other one here that says that Hayes won. So, who's it going to be? What we did, we set up a bipartisan commission. That means it is basically a committee, a group of people from both the Democrat and the Republican parties to argue it out, to say, okay, I think that those votes work and those votes don't, and then we're going to vote on it, and okay, who we voted on is the winner. And if it's an even 50-50 split between Republicans and Democrats, then whatever, maybe one person goes to the other side, and they agree on it. Or they all stick to their party lines, and Republicans vote for the Republican and Democrats vote for the Democrat, and nobody gets anywhere. That's the hazard of it. So they were supposed to have 7 Republicans, 7 Democrats, and 1 independent. Something fell through with that plan because they ended up with 8 Republicans. And that meant that every time the commission voted on, okay, well, who do you think should be the winner, they decided that it was going to be Hayes. The Democrats were not happy with that. The Democrats really thought that the popular vote should have carried it. They thought that even the Electoral College, which, by the way, Hayes only won by 1 electoral vote, that should have carried it. It was just a matter of recounting those ballots to make sure that we had the right one. Well, they worked out a deal. The Democrats said, okay, we will let you have your Republican president. We will let Hayes become the president, and we will stop arguing about this if you take your federal troops out of the South. You let us invest some more money, give us some incentives to invest more money in railroads in the South, because we really need to build up our railroads. You guys had railroads all through the Civil War. We didn't have very many, and then we built them, and then you guys tore them up, and it's a big mess. And then we'd like to appoint some more Democratic people to higher offices. And the Republicans said yes. And that is why Rutherford B. Hayes became the President of the United States in the 1876 election. That compromise was the Compromise of 1877. Now, the key point of that compromise was that the federal troops were removed from the South, and that meant the end of Reconstruction. Without federal troops there was no way of enforcing that the changes that had been made stayed in place. And we'll talk about how that led to backpedaling and how that led to reverses in some of those changes, and things got worse than the improvements that had been made. We'll talk about that next time. For today, your priorities. Log into Schoology, get your attendance taken, and work on the MLA Heading, Practice a Complete Heading assignment. I'll give you another assignment tomorrow that has more to do with the content, but for now, you can check out the links, make your own camera obscura, look into more of the Panic of 1873, kind of interesting stuff, and hopefully we can have some positive effects with the end of Reconstruction. Talk to you soon.